is that I knew I had the stability of my full-time 9 to 5 nursing job. Like it wasn't going to leave. I had that. And so while I was messing around with like clients, messing around with what my rates were going to be, learning how long it takes me to write a blog, learning how long it takes me to like, get into a flow with clients, I had the stability of income. So like if a client bounced off of me or if something didn't work, like it wasn't my rent on the line, right? It was just like the extra side money I was making while trying to build a business.
Welcome to Nursing Beyond the Bedside. I'm Audrey, your host, and a nurse who pivoted my path several years ago. After 8 years as a critical care nurse, I was ready for change. I craved higher pay and more flexibility, but was struggling to find a clear path forward. Fast forward through positions in recruiting, customer success, and marketing, and many lessons learned along the way. Today, I run Pivot Path, a company dedicated to empowering nurses to redefine their careers. This podcast is designed to help you navigate the journey from clinical bedside nursing to a fulfilling career that aligns with your passions and goals. Here, you'll discover inspiring stories from nurses who've gone beyond the bedside, successfully transitioning to non-clinical roles, or redefining their nursing career. Join us as we hear their stories and share actionable strategies to help you make your own leap. Whether you're a new listener curious about what lies beyond the bedside, or a returning audience member in need of some fresh motivation, this podcast is your go-to resource for exploring new opportunities that can transform your career. Let's get started. Today's episode is for every nurse who's ever thought there has to be more than this, but felt guilty for even thinking it. I'm excited to welcome Claire, whose story might just change how you view your nursing career. As a grad nurse, Claire worked across emergency medicine and cardiology before transitioning to trauma surgery and private dental after earning her RN in 2019. She did everything by the book, got the training, landed the job she thought she wanted, only to realize that maybe this actually wasn't her path. Now, Claire has taken her healthcare knowledge in a completely different direction, creating marketing and educational content for startups, medical schools, and individual creators. What I love about Claire's story is that she is going to share not just how she made this transition, but how she overcame that voice in her head saying that she was abandoning nursing. If you've ever felt stuck between wanting more and feeling guilty for wanting change, this conversation is for you. Claire, welcome to Nursing Beyond the Bedside.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I'm so glad that we're getting to chat today because I think that your story shines a light on something that is so relatable. And that is kind of being that your nursing career, in maybe more ways than one, didn't exactly end up how you had pictured or envisioned from the start. So I think I'd like for you to kick us off by kind of telling us the background of getting into nursing and what you thought your nursing career would look like when you got started.
Totally. So I started my pursuit into becoming a nurse a little bit differently. I was in a biological sciences degree first, trying to figure out if I wanted to go to med school or not. And then eventually I decided I don't want to do that. So I pivoted because I knew I always wanted to do healthcare. And so I had done 2 years of biosci before I got into nursing. So I was already a little bit behind, I guess. But then while I was doing that, I was like, wait, nursing is so fun. The healthcare stuff is so interesting. I think this is going to really be what I want to do. So I went through nursing school the full 4 years, got my RN in 2019. And while I was finishing that up, my final semester preceptorship was in the operating room. Because that's always what I, once I started nursing school, I was like, I think that'll be the place for me. I think it'll be interesting. It's different. And it's just that enough, I don't know, trauma, I guess is not a good word, but it has enough intrigue that I'm it'll be good.
Right.
So I did my preceptorship, loved it. And I was perfect. I have figured out my perfect path. I'm ready to go. So right out of school, got my NCLEX exam, passed, done. And I got accepted into the OR program in Calgary, where I'm from. So basically here, to become an OR nurse, you have to get the certification done. So I immediately out of school got accepted to that. So I was wow, I've bing, bang, boomed the whole way through.
You're doing it.
I'm doing it. Exactly. I was I don't even have to worry about it. And so I finished the program and it was a wonderful program. I got to do hands-on learning stuff while also getting training. And then by the end of the actual training portion, when I was getting handed my certificate, I was starting to look at what my life really was becoming. And I was okay, I'm starting to work in the OR full time. I'm going to start going on to shifts where it's evening and night shifts where I don't have as much support as I maybe would have before when I was still a student. And I had just kind of beelined so quickly, which before felt really powerful. When you're a student, you're I just want to get this sorted. I want to get this done. And then I was standing at the end of the path that I had set for myself. And I was like, do I want to be here? And it's very kind of scary because I think, and maybe this is a familiar thing for other nurses too, when you're going through it, it's just like, it's so linear. Like nursing school teaches you like, oh, well, like you get so many skills, you have so much stuff. And like, if you don't like one unit, shift to another one. You have so many things. But I was standing at the end of this thing, having earned every goal that I thought I had for myself. And I was like, I don't know if this goal is what I actually want to do. And then I started panicking because I was like, what other things can I do outside of bedside care as a nurse? So that's where my whole journey really began.
Yeah. And I think that you called out that a nursing career, I think that the way that it's like presented to us can feel pretty limiting, like kind of pigeonholed at certain stages. And it sounds like you chose nursing, you chose OR, you're like, I actually don't know. And I don't know about you, but like I reached a point in my career, like I did pediatric ER for a while, and then eventually I switched to pediatric ICU. But when you even think about changing specialties, there are other thoughts that kind of go along with that of like, if I go to a new unit, then I'm like the less senior person on the unit. And so like, that means more night shifts, more weekends, more holidays. I'm starting over there. I have to like kind of climb this new totem pole in a totally different unit. So even something as like simple as switching specialties is not necessarily that simple when you're thinking about all of the work that you've just put down to like get on into a certain specialty. So I think that it's not an easy thing with like this, or at least it doesn't feel like this world of opportunity at certain points.
No, I totally agree. And like, for me, when I was in nursing school, I remember there like so many teachers for like different seminar classes would be like, oh, well, like your nursing degree is opening doors for you. You have so many options. But within the context of said doors, it was always bedside. And exactly what you were saying. It was like, okay, well, like you might be a NICU nurse now, but if you don't love that, like you can switch to the OR. But then that on paper sounds interesting. But then exactly what you said, like I think healthcare, especially like with nursing stuff, is so hierarchical that like you might have some experience or some like, I guess seniority is a word that's used a lot on one unit, and then you switch and you're like, not only are you learning a bunch of new skills that are kind of different than what you're doing, you've lost all your seniority. So now you're back at the bottom of the totem pole working your way back up. And like, that's exhausting, especially like if you've been working on a unit for a lot of years and you've gotten used to a position, stuff like that is very stressful. And I think for me, it was a bit different than that because I had done OR, like as a grad nurse before I graduated. I did a bit of like emergency overflow is kind of what the unit was. Like it wasn't like a true ER. It was like extra beds that like any case could come to. So it was all over the place. And then some cardiology. So I knew that like that type of like bedside floor nursing wasn't my favorite. But I was like, okay, I got that experience. And then I went to the OR, but then I had to learn all that new stuff. And I was like, and I just got to that point where I was like, I have all this really interesting, unique healthcare training. Like there's so much information about like health and like human interaction, family dynamics, all the stuff you learn as a nurse. But I don't know if I want to do bedside nursing at all. And then that's where my big panic came in because like nursing school told me I had options. And like I did. But all the options that were like being projected at me were a very certain type of option that I was like, oh no, what if that's not for me?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is such a common experience with nurses. And what I think is really cool about this podcast and the conversation that we're going to get into today is like we both kind of went from that feeling of like, okay, they said there's all these options, but I'm not really feeling like there's all these options. But then you can kind of like break through that wall and you realize, oh wait, I actually do have a lot of options that like go beyond the bedside. So talk to me about like kind of how you took that moment of like, I don't know if this is it for me. Like what else is there? How did you break through that kind of barrier that was there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel a lot of it was blind panic. I could not gonna lie. Like so that was back in like, let's say like late 2019, early 2020 is when I started like really thinking about what I wanted to do because that was when I had finished my OR certificate. And I was like, at the time I had just decided that I was going to leave the OR and I had gotten a job at a private dental clinic, still doing surgery as a nurse, like a dental OR kind of thing. But it was more Monday to Friday, small clinic, like less big trauma hospital. And I was like, that was like a pivot I had made to myself that I was like, maybe that will change it. Like maybe the smaller environment, smaller team, like more routine stuff will fix the dread I was feeling about it. It didn't. But we tried. But the nice thing that it did for me though, is that it gave me a set Monday to Friday schedule that I was like keeping up with. And at the same time, my partner, who's now my husband, was messing around with freelancing. So he doesn't write. He's like a video animator, editor kind of guy. And he was using a platform called Upwork, which is just like a website that is kind of like a job board posting for freelance gigs. I had never heard of it. I had never even heard of freelance work at the time. And he was like, hey, like, I've been messing around with this in my spare time. I've made a little bit of money off it. Are there any skills that you feel like you'd like to try to do? Why don't you make a profile and just see how it goes? And I was like, you know what? Like, I had just kind of pivoted out of the OR. I had more time. I was like, I don't know if nursing's going to want to do. Like, I might as well give it a shot. It's also right around the time of the pandemic. So we all had a bit more time inside. And that is kind of where my jumping off point was. It was like, why not? I guess was kind of my energy.
Yeah. And so to clarify for the audience, because I think freelance work is a foreign topic for a lot of nurses, you know, freelancing is essentially, would you describe it as like taking a contract? So you're not technically employed, but you're taking a contract to fulfill a certain job or deliverable for a company or an individual or whatever it may be. And then, you know, of course, you can build those relationships with those clients and like continue to work with them, or it's kind of like a one and done type deal.
Yeah, it can be both. Exactly. So I think one of my very first clients was he was like a massage therapist. Like he ran like a massage therapy clinic, and he wanted blog articles written by someone who had a medical background about the health benefits of massage and all the other services he offered. So on Upwork, he had a posting that was like, hi, I'm a massage therapist person looking for blog articles. These are what I'm thinking, like, apply. So I applied myself to it. He was like, yep, sounds like a good match. And so we agreed on a rate, and I got paid per blog article that I wrote for him, and we did that for a couple months. So that's an example of like a freelance experience.
And something I also want to call out based on what you just said about him specifically wanting someone with a healthcare background to write these blogs. Because I hear from a lot of nurses when like writing comes up as a possible opportunity of like, well, I'm not a writer. I've never like really written. And it's like, what's important to call out is that actually just the fact that you're a nurse and you kind of can bring that like expertise and voice of authority, that on its own has so much value. And like beyond just like the content that you're putting into the document, but like even as far as like the business owners, like search engine optimization and like the marketing strategy behind it, just the fact that you're a nurse and you have that expertise could be really important.
Oh, totally. And like, there's two things there. Like one, I've had jobs where people would not hire me unless I was an RN. Like they specifically were like, we want someone with credentials in healthcare to write this content. That's not always the case. For some of my stuff, that's not. But I think having that title really did help me in my early days for medical stuff, because they're like, we want someone who's like gone through the gauntlet, knows healthcare, understands what they're writing about. And second of all, I always push back. I've heard that too when I've talked to other nurses who are like, I want to do freelancing or I want to do writing, but I'm not a writer. You chart every day, all day. You are a writer. It's a different type of writing, but you do. And like the same way that anytime you talk to a patient's family about a disease that they're recently struggling with, whatever, like that is communication. You just aren't used to writing it down. But you already know the skills of turning something that's like complex and overwhelming and jargonful into something that someone else can understand. So you've already been trained in becoming like a very like communicative writer. You just maybe don't like think about it in that writing way.
I think you just hit the nail on the head. Nurses are such fantastic communicators. We take super complex information and we distill it down to our patient's level to make sure that they understand a million times a day. So like to your point, like it's no different. You're just doing it on paper. So I think that is really important, and hopefully will help to like kind of break down that like mental barrier that I think nurses have of like, oh, well, I haven't done this before. I don't know how to do this. And you do. Like you can do
really
that.
Do.
So
you really do.
And so I want to talk more about just like your first steps on getting started. So like you were introduced to the Upwork platform and you're like, what the heck? I'm going to get on there and see what comes my way. So how did you find, I guess, like how comfortable were you taking on that first job with it being something new? And how did you continue to grow this into a business from there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, well, at first, I think I was so excited about the opportunity that there might be a way for me to use my healthcare knowledge without bedside care being involved that I was like a little like, arguably like too gung-ho. I was like, yeah, I can do anything. Like, absolutely, throw it at me. And I mean, I did have the added benefit. Like I was starting to do this like not even a full year out of university. So I still had that like, because like in a lot of ways, freelancing, at least the writing I do, is kind of like doing homework. Because like you get assigned a project from a person, you do the brief, which is kind of like a rubric. You complete the task, you do edits, and then you are done. So I was kind of already used to that flow of like, okay, I have like a new task due and like working through that. So I kind of had that on my side. And then, yeah, how did I build into a business? It was, I think it was that perfect kind of like storm of, I knew that I wanted to try something different. I was willing to like push myself to like expand out. And then I knew that if I could get it going, if I could get like 2 clients or 2 or 3, because I was like, the first one's always, you can assume it's a fluke. It's not always, but you assume it's a fluke. Second one, argument's sake, sure, a second fluke. But if a third person's like willing to like pay you and hire you, like you've probably landed on something that's like half decent. And I think in my first 2-ish months of being on Upwork, I had between 3 to 5 people like willingly pay me to do something. Some of them were small. Like some of the projects were very small. They were like for like $100 or whatever. But if you kind of build that muscle of like, okay, someone is willing to see the value in me, that like my services, my work, my writing is worth money. And that's happening more than once. That's happening more than once even. Okay, there's something here that I should probably like keep going with.
Totally. And you did this at first while you were still working, which I think is a really cool perk of freelance work. It's very flexible, and it does, it's a big thing to pivot your career. And there are a lot of considerations that go along with that, especially if you're looking at like quitting a full-time job and being self-employed. I mean, just as one example, but there's just a lot of different things that play into that. And it can hold a lot of people back because, you're thinking like, well, I need to replace my income right away. What about paying for benefits? Like, there's all of these different thoughts rolling through your head. So the fact that you can start freelance working during your free time while still working at the bedside, I think is so huge.
I would argue it's the only way that people should do it. And like, I know that's a bit of a spicy take, but I've seen, maybe it's on LinkedIn again, you never know if these stories are like real or they're for the clicks. But I've seen people be like, oh, well, like I knew that writing or freelancing was going to be my passion. So I cut back at work where I quit my job to follow my dreams. And it's like, I love the energy. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I want you to do that. But like, I agree. Like, for me, what was so nice is that I knew I had the stability of my full-time 9-to-5 nursing job. Like, it wasn't going to leave. I had that. And so while I was messing around with like clients, messing around with what my rates were going to be, learning how long it takes me to write a blog, learning how long it takes me to like, get into a flow with clients, I had the stability of income. So like if a client bounced off of me or if something didn't work, like it wasn't my rent on the line, right? It was just like the extra side money I was making while trying to build a business. So it took, I think I moved quicker than I thought possible because I started freelancing, like making money from it like in early 2020 or early mid 2020. And by the beginning of 2021, I was able to stop working at my nursing job and go freelance full time. Because I had a couple like consistent long-term clients. Some of them I still work with today, actually. Just bonkers.
That's incredible.
Yeah. But they were paying me enough, consistently enough that I was like, okay, like I have a footing. But I would, if I had quit my nursing job and then been like, now I'm going to become a writer, there's months where I made like $20. So it's like, there's no way that was going to be sustainable. So I'm really, as much as it was like a lot of extra work outside of work, it was worth it because it let me grow at whatever speed I was able to.
Yes. And I want to talk about that growth some because I think that you just named a few things that you just have to kind of figure out as you go. Like, what is a fair rate for me to charge? How long does a typical blog take me? Like, what are the key things that I need to be thinking about when writing in this way? Like, how do I market myself to get new clients? Like, all of this is such a learning curve. And I think that as nurses, we are so used to working in an environment where like we need to already know what we're doing to go and do it. Like we need to have the training, the certification, the education to go and do it. And understandably so, because we're dealing in much higher stakes. We're dealing with people's like wellness in their life. So that makes sense. But then if you're stepping into something like writing or building your own business of any kind, you kind of have to break that down and realize like a lot of people don't know what they're doing until they start doing it. And then you just figure it out as you go. So talk to me a little bit about like how that experience was for you.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's something that I feel like is a skill that I've gotten better at over time. And I don't think if you had asked me like right out of university, oh, like Claire, like, are you good with like figuring stuff out on the fly? I would have absolutely said no. Because like, I feel like especially with nursing, exactly what you said, like you need some specific niche training for whatever unit you're on. You need to have certifications. You need to follow policies, protocols. Like there are things that are set in stone and that's for safety reasons. And it's good that like things are that way. But when I started writing, I was like, well, there is no rules. Like I have no governing body that's over me being like, you need to charge this rate or like, you need to email this sort of way, or like if you submit something like this, like it was all on me to figure out. And I think in early stages I was quite terrifying because I was like, how do I know that I'm doing it right? And like the answer is you don't, and you won't ever. I still don't feel like I do anything right. Like I literally just got off a call like yesterday, and I was messaging one of my other freelance writing friends, and I was like, I think I like just, and I didn't do anything like bad or anything, but I was like, I just think that like I could have done this better, and like I could have approached it in this different way. And she's like, yeah, but like I still think you approached it in a good way. It's a different way than maybe you wanted to. It's like there's no correct or whatever way to do it. Like it's just kind of one of those things where you just kind of get hours in trying, and you've planned on something that works well enough for a certain period of time, and then when it doesn't, you have to iterate again and try something else. So it's, if you're okay with that type of like thinking process and creativity on the fly, and I would argue a lot of nurses are better at it than they think they are, because you have to do it every single day especially for floor nursing. I just think back to like, I show up to my 7 a.m. shift and there already be like meds that are late and a patient needs a CT scan and like a doctor who's screaming at you, and like you have to like process all of that and then like divide it out. And you're moving on the fly, and you're making decisions and changing your plan that you might have had in your head at the beginning. It's like that, just on a different kind of scale. So
totally. The trial and error is much less consequential when you are doing it with your own business. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you that I think that whether we realize it or not, like nurses are really good at learning quickly, adapting, and like making decisions and like figuring things out on the go, which I think is just a really important skill to recognize in yourself if you're a nurse who's looking to leave the bedside, but then also like learn how to communicate that, like particularly if you're looking to apply to like a job with the employer, like learn how to communicate that, these are the situations that I'm used to working in. So making these decisions and like sending emails is like, I got it. I can handle that.
I'm used to a dumpster fire. I can handle this one. And I'm okay.
Exactly. Cool. And so you also, something else I just like want to touch on is this like, I'm just a nurse mindset that a lot of us have, that I think like, I think that you kind of alluded to this earlier where you're like, hey, like people are paying me for this. Like, let's see if I can keep this rolling. And I think that, that is a very like positive reinforcement of like, yeah, you're a nurse, but like also you have all of these skills that are so transferable and so powerful. So how did you, I guess, like maybe recognize and overcome that, like, I'm just a nurse mindset?
I think for me, a big part of it is that as I was applying to more and more jobs on Upwork and like, flushing out my like available clients, I got so much positive reinforcement about the fact that I was a nurse. Like time and time again, people were like, oh, you're one of our top candidates, or we really want to work with you because of your background, because of your training, because of what you know. And like, if a client was on the fence about stuff, they're like, oh, but like, you have the lived experience. I got that over and over and over again. Cause I wrote for a lot of like in the early days, like a lot of either tangential health, care people. So like holistic health, like I said, massage, physio. And then I worked for a couple like doctors as well who are running private clinics. And they're like, we trust you and want to work with you because you have the lived experience of being a nurse. Like, what it's like to care for people. You know what it's like to like explain these concepts to people who like are very overwhelmed. So having that like forced into my brain over and over and over again, like it was very validating that like the just a nurse thing is like it's kind of like a sad thing really. Cause like I know like the way that a healthcare is structured, like I mentioned earlier, it's hierarchical. So it's very easy to be like, well, there's so many people above me and they do so many other things than I, like there's so many nurses. So we're just like part of the, like a cog in the wheel or whatever. But like, there are so much skills that every single nurse has. There's so much training, so much education that you all each have. And like, it's a demand, it's a skill, and it's something that you worked hard for, and people will pay you for it, which is really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you on all of that. And I do think that positive reinforcement, like if nurses put ourselves out there in these conversations, I had a very similar experience where I was just conducting like informational interviews, like reaching out to people on LinkedIn and being like, hey, I'm thinking about pivoting my career. Like, would you mind connecting and telling me about like your role or this company or whatever? And I went into those conversations at first very nervous that like people would immediately hear that like I'm a nurse and be like, why are we even having this conversation? And it was quite the opposite. Like people were like, I found that I didn't have to like defend my qualifications, skills, knowledge, expertise, and the transferability of those things to people. People were like endorsing that for me. And I think that like, that's something that nurses, I think it's a common thing for us to think just because of the environment that we kind of grow up in as nurses. But I do think that the more that we put ourselves out there, the more we kind of get that positive reinforcement of like, oh yeah, you're not just a nurse. Like you can do so much.
Oh, totally. I'm like, I think like I no longer have an active RN because I hadn't been like bedside nursing, but I still had the training. And like, even when I had like the RN and used it, like, and like would mention it like in job pitches, they're like, oh, you're an RN, like amazing. Like, it's like, it was such an easy proof that like I was very competent. Like, it was a very quick thing that people like immediately were like, oh, absolutely want to work with her because of that. So,
yes. Okay. Well, so this segues us to our next topic, I think, pretty well. And that is this kind of like martyrdom culture in nursing and how we kind of feel a sense of guilt if we consider doing something outside of traditional bedside nursing. So share some with me about how that felt for you.
oh, it's awful. It's such an interesting thing. And I think it's partially because, like, at least I'm from Canada, so my healthcare system is a bit different than America. Ours is publicly funded. There is kind of that, like, communal thing that if you work in public spaces that you're kind of like a bleeding heart, that like it's for the good of the system and like you kind of do it. And like nursing especially falls into that category because I feel like a lot of nursing is very like matrilineal in a way, kind of, where it's like you do it because you're caring, you do it because you're loving, you do it because like it's your calling. You hear that all the time. Nursing should be your calling if you want to care for people. But at the end of the day, like nursing is a career. It's a science. Like I have a BSc in nursing. It's like, there is so much training. There is so much specific stuff that you have to do to become that thing. And like, of course, you need to be empathetic. You need to be like interested. And I think the great nurses, people who care about people are going to be great nurses. But I don't know. I just kind of was sitting there like, and I remember I had this conversation with like a more senior nurse while I was in the operating room about how I was like, oh, you know, like nursing is just like really wearing me down. Like, I'm just like not really sure if this is the fit for me. And she's like, oh, well, like if it's not your calling, it's not your calling. And I was like, well, I kind of think that's BS. Like, it's a career. And like, I don't know, like, you're not going to get paid for like caring for people because it's your calling. Like, it's a career is a choice that you make. And like, I don't know, if I was a guy who worked on Wall Street and I was like, talking about stock bonds just isn't my calling. Like, they wouldn't be like, you're right. Like, I don't know. It's just like, just because it's like care based and because it's just like a system that's built around, I don't know, like martyrdom in that way, it is just like, it's very quickly easy to feel bad about yourself or like to feel like you're abandoning yourself or the system if you leave. So I found that very difficult. And it was something I really grappled with when I was deciding if I wanted to like quit nursing and go into freelancing full time.
Yeah, I relate with that a lot. And I think that that's like a very common feeling when nurses think about like leaving the bedside because, you know, a lot of the time we are passionate about our career and like we love the way that we feel after walking away from a day at the bedside where we know that we made a like tangible impact in someone's like day life experience. And so I think that, you know, leaving that behind, there's certainly something to that. But I think that the way that we feel guilty, like I think that some of that guilt that I felt, I placed on myself, but I also think that some of it came from just like the profession and like those around me of like, you're kind of like lesser than if like you can't hang or like if you don't want to like do that anymore. And so I think that it's that piece of what the profession puts on you and kind of like how we communicate within the nursing community about that. I think that that's the part that I would really like to see shift because I don't think it's fair that if someone wants to make a career change, because back to what you're saying, like this is a career, like this can change. This is not something that I've like committed my life to. So it's like, I think that there needs to be some acceptance of that and support for nurses who are like, okay, yeah, like I've gotten my experience here, like for whatever reason, this isn't the right thing for me or for me right now. So I'm going to go try something else. I think that there needs to be like more support behind that sentiment than like a shaming or like a putting down because you want to go and do something else.
I fully agree. And like, I think some of that shame stuff comes, and I don't think it's directly from like nurses necessarily, but it's like that system. Like I agree. Cause like, I think when I was in the OR, I had a lot of opportunity to like do overtime all the time because cases would run late. And I'd be like, no, I'm going to go home because I have my freelance stuff that I could be doing and need to be doing because it's due soon. And like, I wouldn't tell people I had the freelance stuff going on because I wanted to keep that very close to chest while I was figuring out what it was. But like, there was definitely like a bit of pushback because I was like, oh, well, clearly like you're new and like you're new to this unit. Like, why don't you want to stay? Like, why aren't you part of the team? And then I think also like the units I was working on had a lot of short staffing issues too. So then you'd already be overwhelmed. You'd already be stressed. And then it's like, well, why aren't you staying? Why aren't you taking extra shifts? Why aren't you offering to stay longer? Like, we need you. And like, I'm doing it. I, another nurse who's burnt out and working too hard and being like taken advantage of for the kindness and the compassion that I have. I'm working more because like we need to, but you're not. And it just became very like, so it's kind of that guilt thing of too, where I was like, am I being selfish by choosing to do stuff for myself outside of nursing? And like, should that even be a factor? Because like, again, like it's my career, it's a job, and like all those overtime things, all that stuff is optional. I'd filled my requirements. And like, of course, when I can, I would want to help those people out and do stuff, but like, it shouldn't be an expectation that I should be like, the nurses should be rising up to fill the gaps the healthcare system has made. So.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that calling out that overtime dilemma is so key because, I mean, we're short-staffed everywhere. There's never enough nurses. There's never enough people on shift. And I think that like guilt for not picking up and being the one to like fill that gap is really real and honestly not really fair. I remember when I took my first job at Health Tech, and I'm like, wow, like unlimited time off, like flexible work day. Like, you know, of course I had my hours. I was expected to be online every day, but like if I needed to run to an appointment or something, like no big deal. It's fine. I'll get back online later. Realizing that was the attitude for other people's jobs. Yes. I'm like, holy cow, like nurses are honestly, like, I hate to say it, but like, I think I'm going to say it, like being taken advantage of because we are like known to be like compassionate, caring team players. And it's like, can't we be both? Like, can't we be compassionate, caring team players, but also be individuals who are working a job? And we also have a life and a family and things that matter outside of that job.
Yeah, I fully agree. I mean, like, to get really niche and maybe a bit spicy, like, I think a lot of it comes down to, like, it's similar for teachers as well, because, like, it's also a very public thing. My sister is a teacher, and she struggles a lot with the same thing of, like, expectation of taking on more than she should, and especially hers uncompensated, which is ridiculous. But I think a lot of those positions, like, nursing historically, anyway, has been a more, like, female-driven profession. Teaching similarly, like, not saying that all nurses are feminine. Obviously, that's not true, but, like, historically, that's been accurate. And I think society is very, very good at deprioritizing women's labor. And because of that, I think it's very easy for things to like get swept under the rug. We're like, oh, just take on extra. Just do more. Because women's labor is not always compensated correctly the same way that men's is, which is crap.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think there's something to that. And, you know, one more point on it, like being a career and not like this, like you've agreed to like take this oath to be a martyr for your working years. Like, it is a career, and other people in other industry change jobs all the time for many different reasons. And I think that it is completely fair that, especially with a career like nursing, where it is physically, emotionally taxing, that wouldn't necessarily make sense for someone's like 40 working years. Right?
Oh gosh.
Like,
yeah.
I mean, especially like working night shifts, weekends, holidays, like it just makes sense to me that like that job is not going to fit through every chapter of life. And something I will say that I think is kind of like the beauty of starting off in nursing is like, we can always go back. Like if there is another chapter in your life where like that makes more sense and you want to go back to doing that, maybe you miss the like hands-on patient interaction, like you can always go back to nursing. But I think that this like expectation that like once you're in, and this is the straight and narrow, like I don't think that's fair. And I think that it is totally reasonable to expect that someone would burn out of this type of position and need a break, whether they like come back or not. Like, I think that's reasonable that, you know, that would happen. So it's just interesting that in many ways, it's not like other careers, but in some ways that it should be treated like any other career. It's just very much not.
I agree. Yeah. I just think of like all my friends who have like 9-to-5 business jobs or engineering positions or whatever. And they're like, oh, like they change their careers like once every like 1 to 2 years. Like a lot of them do different, like not even just different companies. Like when my friends hop from like a different type of engineering to software stuff, like he went like a big jump and like no one's like, are you sure? Are you sure you want to leave? And he's like, oh, well, cool. That's awesome. Like, what an interesting new job position for you. But like, when I was leaving nursing, I got a lot of pushback from nurses, but also like my family as well was like, are you sure? Like, are you abandoning? Like, why were you leaving? You know, we need more nurses. Like, are you sure you don't want to just try a different unit? Like, there was definitely like more pressure, and like there was a more interesting discussion, I guess, about like why me leaving was like more of like a selfish act, which is kind of strange.
Yep, absolutely. Something to think about. So share with us how you feel like your work-life balance, or just like kind of the way your day-to-day flows, is different now than it would be working bedside as a nurse.
Well, I mean, I make my own schedule now, which is fantastic. So when I was finishing up in the OR and working at the dental clinic, I was very fortunate that I was kind of a strict Monday to Friday, because I was in training for the OR part, and I switched to a job that was 9 to 5. So I never had, like I did when I was in grad school, have the whole evenings, nights, weekends, holidays, the whole thing. And it exploded my life schedule for 2 years, where I was like, I don't know when I am awake anymore. It was a nightmare. So kudos to all the nurses who can do that long term, because it's exhausting.
Yeah.
But so I was doing 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. Very fortunate in my early nursing career to be doing that. But now, as I'm freelance, and I have clients who are all over different time zones, I just kind of get to decide when I want to work. Like, obviously, I have enough work that I have to be busy. But like, for example, this morning, I knew we were recording this, and I was like, I want to be rested. I want to take time. So I woke up a bit later, had a shower, and then I know, because I pushed some of my work off this morning, I'll be working a bit later into the evening tonight. Like, I might work till like 6 or 7. But I got to choose to do that, because I was like, I know that I want to do a call. I want to be like, I don't want to be like stressed out. I don't want to have like done a bunch of emails and writing before it. So it's like, that flexibility has like massively upscaled my life. I've been doing it now for a couple of years, so I kind of feel like I've taken it for granted in a way, when I'm like, oh, like, I can work on that on the weekend if I want to, but I also don't have to. Or like, I can work on that in the evening, or like, I'll jump up early in the morning and catch up on it. But like, there's no restriction that I have to do something within a certain window, or I have to be present for something, which has really like positively impacted how I like associate like my productivity.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a different kind of freedom. And actually, I will also, like, to be fair, I'll call out, it is not always an easy transition from going from a nursing job in particular, where our day is very regimented and task oriented, and things have to be done at a certain time, and like, you prioritize that way. So going from that to switching to like a very loose schedule of like, well, I have work that needs to be done by this deadline, but it's kind of up to me as to how I fill the days and get that work done between now and then. And that is like fantastic when you figure it out, but it can be that can be a really hard thing, I think, for nurses in particular, to make that transition, because we're not used to working that way. And now we are very organized, and we are very accustomed to deadlines and things like that. So I not to say that it is not possible. I think it's very possible. But just to call out, like, the transition of like learning how to do that is not necessarily easy.
Oh, no, not at all. And like, I think when I was in nursing, like, you kind of get the brain gratification of like, you're busy, like, you're needed, right? So like, I know if I show up from 7 to 3 for my day shift, I'll be busy that whole time. I'm in demand, people need me, whatever. With freelancing, like, I have times where I'm like, oh my God, I have so much work. I am doing so much. But then I also have periods like, for example, it's beginning of January when we're recording this. So like, people are coming back from holidays. It's a bit slower. So I'm in less demand yet. I have like projects coming in, but I'm not in demand yet. Like, they're still getting trickled down. So because of that, like, I have a lot more like nebulous time. And that like is relaxing, which is nice. But also for a person like me who like, I put a lot of like my self-worth into my productivity and what I'm doing, it can be a very like emotionally taxing too, where I'm like, oh, like, why am I not feeling so good about myself like last little bit? I'm like, oh, is it because like I'm maybe not as busy as like my brain like thinks I should be? So there is definitely like an emotional part to like managing your schedule that way, because like it's like very up and down, like roller coaster.
Absolutely. Well, I want to wrap this conversation up by kind of sharing some like tactical advice for nurses who are interested in writing. You know, I think, you know, you mentioned Upwork as a platform. We talked about what freelance is, and we talked about just kind of how nurses are already like solid communicators and how that translates. But like, do you have any additional advice or takeaways for nurses who are listening and are like, you know, maybe I do want to do something else, and I'm just not sure how to take those first few steps?
Yeah, I have a couple of pieces of advice that like hopefully are a little helpful. For me, what really helped in the beginning was just deciding to do it, which I know is like such boring, nebulous, stupid advice, but like, I mean, it's really like just deciding like, I'm going to give it a go and like try. Because I think at least for me, like I'm a very like much perfectionist and very much like I like to have like, I don't know, I know that I'm doing something that's going to like work out. Sometimes it's not. And I think giving myself permission to fail a little bit as I stumble along, giving it a try was like something that really helped me boost my ability to become this type of writer that I do for work now, which is awesome. Second thing that I like is my number one piece of advice I tell any nurse who's like, I want to start writing, but I don't have any clients and I don't know what to do and I don't know where to start. My number one thing is to start writing and to make yourself a simple, small portfolio. You do not need to have clients to do that. You do not need to have like a writing background to do it. All you need to do is exactly what I did when I started, is to think of 3 topics that you're happy to write about. So for me, at the very beginning, that was like an article about diabetes. I was like, I'll write something about a medication that I know a little bit about, and I'll try an email. Let's try it out. And so I think the blog article, I was like, diabetes is something that's interesting. Sure. So I did not write a full blog article. I wrote like a snippet, like a couple paragraphs of it, liked how it read, and I was like, perfect. That's a snippet of a blog article right there. Next, I did a little like more pharmaceutical and like focused piece about like medication side effects. Wrote that, was like, perfect, done. And then the third one, I did a little email sample that was more like wellness oriented. So it was like, what's the top sunscreen of the year kind of thing. That was more marketing, fun, jargony, enjoyable read kind of thing. Again, just small snippets of things, not full pieces. And that was my portfolio. And I was like, you know what? This is where I'm at right now. I have no paying clients, but it's examples of what I can write because I wrote it. And that was the 3 pieces that I used when I started reaching out to the people on Upwork. And I got hired off of those pieces time and time again. And I wrote those in early 2020. I literally just got a comment like at the end of last year being about a piece that I'd written from then, like my email one. They're like, we just love the way you worded this. So it's just, I think it's such a big thing where people are like, I just don't have the experience. I don't have the stuff. I don't write. It's like, just try and just put together a thing. And then you can always feel like, hey, it's not working. Write another small little piece and try it out. So that's been my number one takeaway that like worked for me that I really hope translates to other people too.
I love that advice. And, I've talked to other writers too, and everybody has their own kind of like steps of how to get into it. But that is so tangible. And like, it doesn't even require you to reach out to any client at first, right? Like that first step is just like writing. And like, it doesn't have to be for a client. Like, I think that is genius. So
yeah.
I think that feels very approachable.
Yeah, thank you. There is a lot of advice out there, and like I'm not saying that there is a right way and wrong way to start a business. There isn't. Do what feels right for you. But there is advice out there that I've seen of people being like, oh, when you're starting your medical writing business, like reach out to nonprofits or organizations and offer to do writing for free. And that always makes my like back of my head tingle, because I'm like, you shouldn't be starting your business doing work for free, because you always have value and your skills are of worth. So I always have that little like hesitation where I'm like, because I think the argument is you do the free work and then you have a provable portfolio piece that's done. And that's valid. That's totally fair. But for me, I liked that like I made a portfolio for myself and then got hired off it. And so my first work that I ever did for a client was paid. So that's something that I think, especially as you're learning to like become an entrepreneur, to like flex that muscle of becoming like a business person, is important to know that like your work has worth and therefore should be paid for.
I love that. I think that is going to be such a great note for us to end on, because you know what? You do have value. Your skills do have worth, without adding any single additional thing today. Like, you've already got that going for you. If you'd like to learn more about Claire's writing or connect with her after today's show, you can find her website, newsletter, LinkedIn, and Instagram account linked in the show notes below. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to hit subscribe to keep up with our latest episodes. And if you were inspired by today's conversation, I hope you'll share this episode with someone who'd love it just as much as you did. If you're ready to pivot your path, sign up for my free newsletter at mypivotpath.com. Get non-bedside jobs delivered to your inbox every week. And if you have questions or just want to say hi, feel free to email me at audrey@mypivotpath.com. Thanks for listening, and until next time.